You know, in many ways, today we are more separated than we've ever been. We are filled with moments of isolation and barriers and walls, both personally, but also in our systems. You know, when I think of a bridge, literally a bridge, it's a physical structure that we've all been on that connects one to the other, something that feels familiar, somewhere you've been, to somewhere that's new or the other. Today, I invite you into a courageous space as we talk with one of my friends and colleagues, Kate Hanissian, who has dedicated her life to this work, this learning, this ever journey that we're on to figure out how and why it's important to bridge communities. So today we're talking about something you know very well. You've committed your whole life to and continue to learn and continue to inspire me and others. We're talking about bridging communities. Why? Why have you committed your life to this work, and what does it mean to you?
Oh, wow. There's so many reasons I have committed my life to this work, and I'm still, as you mentioned, and I appreciate you saying it, learning very much. We're living in a time where this is a big question of our day, is how do we learn how to be with one another? To me, it's the most important question we can ask. Not only do people not have access to certain things, but then also there's whole other ways of being that are beautiful and different than how I understand the world to be.
So earlier before we were here, I was on a bridge, a literal bridge. I was trying to help our viewers, our audience, kind of visualize and understand how a bridge is a powerful analogy. Not only for us as humans of going from one to the other, but kind of a higher level, right? The systems, the organizations, this big picture. So can you walk us through what this big picture, bridging communities, because we'll get to the person level in a little bit. What does that look like from your experience and from what you're learning?
Yeah, and I think that's changed. My understanding of what all the different systems that are at play in this work has changed over time as I've learned to open up my own thinking. Again, back to that, there isn't sort of one right way. There's many different groups of people and systems at play that are all working to try and say, how do we come together differently in community, and how do we do it for all? How do we do it to make sure everyone feels welcome at the proverbial table or has access to the metaphorical bridge, right? I really love this work from Deepa Iyer from the Social Movement Project, which basically talks about that there's multiple different ways and different types of people. We need weavers, people that can build and weave in between people that are comfortable in different types of environments. We need healers, there's a lot of trauma associated with not having access, right? With the pain that we've inflicted on each other in the past, in the world, in our communities. It takes many different types of people working in all the systems, in the education system, in the healthcare system, and all of these things. And there's so many people doing the work in beautiful ways. And anybody can do this work, right? And there's not one right way to do it.
So you mentioned people that have never had access to this bridge. Can we go a little deeper into that? What have you seen when we don't have bridging communities, when we don't do this work, and whether intentional or not intentional?
Yeah.
What does that look like, and what does our future look like without this work?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think the future is now. I think when we are separate from one another, so when we live separate from one another, when we work separate from one another, when we send our kids to school separate from one another, when we are in isolation from one another, whether that be across, again, race, class, ability, gender norms, etc., we distrust things that are foreign to us. It's natural in our human psyche to say, oh, this thing is other than me, I don't understand it, and therefore I can't trust it. I think in general what we see is certain populations suffering more than others, particularly those without access to healthcare, education, wealth. Now we know that disproportionately affects our Black and brown communities, particularly trans communities. Black trans women are actually the most likely to have these poor outcomes. So we really have to look at who is most affected. But this is not just a race issue. It is across all races, all ages, all classes, those folks that don't have access to the systems, whether sometimes it's a geographic issue, right? If you live in a rural area, you might not have access to really quality health care. Until we are ready to say the common good is more important than my good, we're going to continue to create these widening gaps with one another. So I'm really interested in what is the common good and how do we teach our kids? How do we say this is a priority in all of our lives because it's better for all of us? All of us have experienced certain levels of privilege, whether that was a coach that helped us along the way, or money that we had access to, or the color of our skin that allowed us to be trusted in our jobs more easily, or have better access to education or transportation. Whatever those privileges are, understand how they've happened throughout history. There's some incredibly rich history to know and learn about why we are where we are. I think when it comes to personal benefits, there's so many, actually. I think when we get caught in that there's one way of being, we then experience just one way of joy. So imagine if you ate the same thing for dinner every night and never tried different foods, or even this is a basic thing, but I lived in India for a while and they would celebrate color as something to celebrate. Imagine if you only had one color in your life, right? Like the diversity of experience of other people and that they brings richness to life. It can show you there's a million different ways to find joy, to find connection, and you don't have the only answer to that. So imagine it's just like extra joy, extra ways of being, extra knowledge, extra wisdom. So it can really add to the richness of our lives and our ability to be humble and connected to one another.
So Kate, I want to do this work. Everything you're saying it's inspiring, right? Because it's about how I live my life, and I want our viewers and anybody who's involved in this series to do it also, but it's tricky. So can you give me a short list? I know it's not a short list, but your mantras, your mindsets, where do we start? How do I start every day ready to do this bridge building work?
I'll tell you what works for me, although I just want to share again, I'm still on this learning journey. Judgment cannot coexist with curiosity. So when I find myself slipping into judgment, which I'll be honest is often, right? Like we have all our opinions and our judgments. And this is not just around race or class issues. When we sit down and we get curious about why, what is the genesis of what's happening? Why is this situation the way it is? 9 times out of 10, I'm surprised and changed by that experience. So I would say, stay curious. I would say, be vulnerable and keep a learning mindset, so let the work teach you. So instead of saying, I'm going to bring my expertise and I'm going to get it right, just saying, like, what can I learn? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's a difference between just being uncomfortable and being threatened. So learn what the difference is. I think sometimes we all feel that if we get something wrong, we get defensive, and we either fight, flight, freeze, fawn. There's all these different ways that we respond. And so I think it's really important to learn the difference between, am I just uncomfortable right now, or am I actually threatened? Because if I'm just uncomfortable, that's actually where learning happens. Right now, it's one thing if I'm actually, my physical health or my emotional health is actually threatened, but discomfort is not the same thing. And so how do we allow ourselves to stay in that place of discomfort so that the learning can take place?
So we've been on this journey together, learning about all different things, talking about discussion topics that might be familiar to you. They might have felt like, oh, I know this. And some might have been new, expanding your knowledge and expanding your heart and thinking about new people, new cultures, new communities, and at the heart of it, all of the systems, all of the history and organizations and things that make up this complex web that we live in. And so today we finalize it with Bridging Communities, and I'm grateful that you spoke on so many of the things that we had spoken about in the last 6 weeks. So we know, and you've taught me, that the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning. It's a continuous cycle and journey that we might have started as individuals, but we're going to walk through it together.